auch präsentieren sollte, wie sie involviert ist, wird in die Stadt eigentlich sehr gut geeignet, dort einzugreifen. Außerdem sind die Hofstallungen von Fischer von Erlach, die selber bauten, also man hat sich mit diesen Dingen ja sehr intensiv theoretisch beschäftigt und nun galt es, dort direkt auf diese Situation zu reagieren.
So the competition for the new museums in the Fischer von Erlach complex, just behind the Hofburg, was an ideal starting point for these large urban projects.
Und andererseits gab es den Flakturm, eine sehr unbewältigte Geschichte in Österreich. Man wollte den immer sprengen, es hat irgendwie nicht funktioniert, technisch nicht.
On the other hand, there was in this area an anti-aircraft tower which couldn't be removed, it couldn't be demolished, and has always been a problem in Austrian debates.
Und andererseits eine kleine Biedermeierstruktur, die zum Großteil sehr schlecht und sehr lieblos, also von einem sehr proletarischen Bezirk renoviert wurde und eigentlich von der Bevölkerungsstruktur sehr stark verändert wurde.
And on the other hand, a very small grain early 19th century Biedermeier residential structure that had been poorly renovated and is being occupied by lower class of residents.
Und diese komplizierte Situation hat uns dazu gebracht, also sich ein halbes Jahr sehr intensiv mit der Situation zu beschäftigen und überhaupt eine Idee von Architektur oder wie man in diesen Bereichen, oder diesen Zusammenhängen, nachdem die Situation sehr komplex war, als eine Lösung für uns mal zu finden.
And this complex situation meant that they spent half a year studying this problem in order to begin finding or defining a position of their own.
Und so ist unser sogenannter Minimalismus entstanden, der mit Minimalismus oder der hier diskutiert wird sicher überhaupt nichts zu tun hat.
So this is how their minimalism began, which he feels has very little to do with the minimalism that we're discussing here.
I think that's quite a relevant point in a sense. I think it hasn't been discussed yet. That there seems to be, everyone said that it's the same strong similarity, but now we have a point that says, on the one hand, you don't have nothing in common with your words. You say they're not the same. They're just not the same. So I think we talk about that maybe a bit. And on the other hand, do the Austrians not care about theory? I mean, is that
Oh no.
Austrian?
I think Austrians do care about theory. That's what he, in a way, has raised as a kind of negative spectre that they have spent a lot of years, and I think are still spending many years now or hours reading theory. No, still people are still reading theory today. I mean, Zemper has made a comeback, like nobody, I think. But maybe you should answer the question. Do you involve yourself with theory?
Ich habe das nicht sehr gut verstanden.
Ist es wichtig, ist Theorie wichtig in Österreich? Bedeutet es denn Österreich irgendwas? Liegt es Ihnen am Herzen?
Ja, generell kann man nicht sagen, dass die Theorie sehr wichtig ist in Österreich. Also man kann überhaupt nur von einer Gruppe sprechen, die überhaupt diskutiert und spezifisch nachdenkt über Probleme. Also das dürfte aber überall gleich sein. Aber es wird in Österreich sehr viel über Architektur gesprochen und es wird auch relativ viel kompliziert.
Generally, Hofstatter feels that theory is not very important, but it is important to those small circles that continue talking about theory.
Ja, das war jetzt, glaube ich, missinterpretiert. Ich glaube schon, dass die Theorie sehr wichtig ist.
Ja,
aber
Sie
das
haben
heißt
gesagt, dass
nicht,
es nicht überall wichtig ist, wenn ich das
ja,
richtig...
für den Großteil des Bauens ist es natürlich sehr unwichtig.
Also für die kleinen,
Also
in kleineren Gruppen,
ja.
kleineren Zirkeln. So it is the case that for the majority of architects it's not very important, but for small circles of architects it is important. So like any other place, if I remember your comment correctly. Theorie. Welche Theorie?
Ja, das Theorie verstehe ich natürlich einmal, dass, also wenn man als praktizierend, als entwerfender Architekt über Architektur nachzudenken, also nicht Theorien zu übernehmen oder das war vielleicht die Diskussion, wo ich ein bisschen was sagen kann, also in dieser Zusammenarbeit mit oder in das Denken im Kunstraum, also nicht Architektur mit Kunst aufzupfropfen, also wir sind ja der Meinung, dass Architektur nicht Kunst ist, weil sie viel zu heteronom ist, um überhaupt das beanspruchen zu können.
First of all, the last thing first. Hofstatter believes that architecture is not art because it's far too heterogeneous as a discipline. Was haben Sie noch am Anfang gesagt über
Also, dass wir uns damit beschäftigen.
Yes, that of course, as a practicing architect, one does reflect on what one does, and insofar as one reflects on what one does, this is part of theory without taking over or taking on other people's theories.
Und das war eben der Versuch, es einen anderen Weg zu finden, also um als Architekt überhaupt theoretisch Architektur, also das ein Hilfsmittel eigentlich zu finden für Architektur als Theorie, also dass man praktisch, das ist schwierig, die Objekte, oder war zum Beispiel der Versuch, ein Hilfsmittel für Architektur als Theorie auch zu finden, also ein theoretisches Denken, das noch nicht konkret werden kann, konkret geworden ist, also irgendwie darzustellen.
So the objects that were part of these exhibitions and installations became a way of thinking about architecture, became a way of theorizing about architecture.
Vor allem ist es wichtig, wenn man nicht historisch argumentieren will, dann ist das wichtig, weil sonst streitet man immer zu viel über Begriffe.
It's important, especially if one doesn't want to become part of a historical debate, to have these more projective ideas.
Das genügt jetzt noch.
Any other Austrian architect? Yeah. The role of theory in Austria. The role of theory for
Theory. What is theory meant is that the relation to the world before. What is it? Or is it the thinking over the undoing? Why do we the things? And in this way, I think theory would be used in our practice as something to make clear what we do, and minimalism would be something which we use in that way that we minimalize decisions in a given situation. We try to define a situation and afterwards minimalize the decisions. Sorry, I could not follow the discussion before very well, so I'm not so sure what it was talked about and what kind of theory was meant. But we also are not a typical Viennese office. We came to Vienna from Graz, and Graz is a place where theory, in that sense, is not very present. In Graz, the making of things is, when we started there, it was in the 70s and the 80s, and what most architects do there is trying to make strong objects. It's very short told, of course, but to make something of a situation which has a certain authenticity and strongness. We like that aspect very much, and we try to bring this specific in to every situation we are coming to as architects.
Can I just make a sort of general point about theories, as I would? One of the things one notices is the immediate desire of architects, not all here, to delegitimize the discussion of theory by the claim that we architects don't do that. You do theory, and therefore, I wasn't necessarily talking about you, but I can see that you identify yourself with my description. but no, you've talked so much, let someone else have a go. I think that one should make a very important distinction, and a very serious distinction, between the role of theory in pedagogy and the role of theory in an architect's office. Now, these can overlap, but I as someone who's been involved in teaching in architecture schools for at least 10 years, have become more and more convinced of the need for architectural theory, whatever it may be, and a research around theory as forming part of architectural pedagogy, as forming part of what an architecture student, what he or she does in the X number of years that they're studying. Now, the nice thing about theory, whether it's in architecture or not, is that it doesn't have a direct application. The very sad people are those who read Deleuze and then do literally folded buildings. We saw examples of that today. The equally sad people are those who read Derrida and do literally deconstructed buildings without thinking through the problem of the literal. Now, one needs architectural space, sort of pedagogical space, within which students and the faculty involved can move slowly, carefully and respectfully through those topics. That should be an integral part of, in my view, architectural practice. From my own experience of teaching at Columbia University, the relationship between myself and an architect working together on a studio where we both recognise what it is that we did. One didn't pretend to be the other, so the creative tension was important, was again pedagogically very important. Now, I think that that's how one ought to talk initially about theory. Now, what an architect does in his or her office or practice is really up to them. I've been involved in a number of architectural practices in America in which every fortnight someone comes in to give a paper. It could be about some recherche topic in philosophy, film theory or whatever, and all the people working in the studio the office rather, have to attend the seminar, have to discuss, and the impact that has on their work is really up to them. But there is an ethos of theory, to use that taboo word in England, within architectural practice. But it's always done, in the offices I've been involved in, always done in such a way that it doesn't follow from listening to a lecture on Robbe-Grillet that you then go off and do labyrinthine buildings. You know, that would be as naive as the naive dismissal of theory. So I think one just has to take a deep breath and move very quietly with theory and not feel threatened. It's okay, you know, but it really has to do. You know.
But I think the questioner who's sitting over there has started a very important discussion, which is one about how do we externalize our decision making, and if theory is a kind of framework by which we externalize our decision making and by which we can set out the intentions and the effects. This is an important way of testing whether these effects are actually realizable or effective, so to speak.
My point is that you have to distinguish between pedagogy, between teaching, between this place and what it does, or the graduate school in Columbia where I've taught, and architectural practice. The overlap is important, but they're two, at times, very different activities.
I agree. I'm agreeing with you. I'm just trying to, in a way, bring this whole discussion about what theory is and what the role of theory is in Austria and what the role of theory is to these practitioners back to the argument about beyond the minimal, so that we can, in a way, perhaps end either on a question or on some kind of outlook because we're not going to come to any kind of conclusion within the next 10-15 minutes. It strikes me that the last comment made by Richard is quite revealing, that he was saying people in Graz are interested in making strong architecture, a strong piece of architecture. Now that use of word strong, I think, is maybe should be interpreted in an ambivalent way. It's not just strong in a sense of forceful, it's also strong in the sense of quality. I think that would be the truer interpretation. But it is part, as I would suggest, of now I use the word minimalist tradition, and in the way that the minimalist tradition is a kind of extension of neoclassicism, as we've in a way already touched upon that, to rescue a kind of visual authority for architecture. And this would be my theoretical criticism of the current position of minimalism, that it is full of contradictions, that it employs techniques, morphological techniques, compositional techniques of detailing, which are fundamentally contradictory to some of the ideals which one associates with those, with that position. And insofar as, in a way, we are all permitted here, whether practicing architects, non-practicing architects, or architectural historians, theoreticians, we are all we all have the right to look at this issue and to say, well, if what I'm suggesting to you is true, if there are these fundamental contradictions in minimalism, what is the way out? Beyond the minimal, what is the next step of, what are the next thought steps, or what are the next design moves that we need to make in order to escape these contradictions?
Is the contradiction maybe to term it all minimalism or beyond minimalism? Because I think we heard it twice now that the Austrians would not include themselves in a minimalist project. Maybe I translate it to German as well. Meine Frage ist, meine Gegenfrage war, ob der Fehler nicht darin liegt, diese österreichischen Arbeiten als Minimalismus zu definieren. Weil ich glaube nicht, dass irgendjemand in Österreich sich selbst als Minimalist beschreibt.
Ja, das hat schon einen ganz gewissen Vorteil, um das jetzt polemisch oder pointiert zu sagen, weil die Sachen dann ausgestellt werden. Also
well, I think majority of people have understood, but Michael Hofstatter is saying that there is an advantage to being labeled minimalist because you have a chance of being exhibited, even if you're not really part of this.
Es geht nicht nur um die Ausstellung, aber dann kann man das vielleicht wirklich studieren und auf das Beyond zurückkommen.
The comment I wanted to make was in relation to this is that, and that's why the sort of work, the sort of argument that Brett adduced, I think is very important, is that what one sees with minimalism is a link to what happens to the commodity and the extension of the commodity within what one may call late capitalism. It seems to be, there seems to be a link, and if you want to do the history, it's very easy to see that Greenberg's arguments and even Rosenberg's argument about that the object should be pure object, should be just event, leads logically, inexorably to minimalism. And so the way out, this is not the sort of language I think one should use, but the engagement with it involves both the recognition of the sort of work that Brett was doing, but then to say that also what minimal architecture represents is the combination of elegance and the abandoning of the possibility of architecture having criticality. Now, that seems to me the two things, and Herzog and Demaron's work, which is elegant and beautiful beyond measure, nonetheless seems to exemplify that. It becomes a trophy It's trophy architecture, and the trophy is architecture having lost the battle to be architecture and having become building. That's to be polemical. Now, the way out, as it were, is to take up, as actually Michael Hofstatter said at the very beginning of his talk, or the thing that Moisten read, was the interrelationship, the always already present interrelationship between function and form. To recognize that part of the overdetermined function of the minimal is as the trophy of the abandoning of the critical, and to work out whether, without hubris, it is possible in 1990, the year 2000, for there to be such a thing as critical architecture. And it's very interesting that at a conference on light construction at Columbia, Joan Ockman and Herzog both said that the notion of critical architecture was simple arrogance, and it was advanced by people who were still stuck in the time warp of the 60s. And all of that may be true, but I think that should form part of the analysis. So the way out, it's not a formulation I'd ever want to use for a second, is to ask, is it possible for architecture in 1998, whatever year you want, to be critical and yet also be architecture? And that's why one has to differentiate art from architecture. And that's why, as the students have heard me say a number of times, Matter Clark's investigations in regard to the house are not architecture, though architects can learn a lot from that engagement. What the flip in architecture is to that sort of engagement with the house is a question that can only be thought through from within architecture. So the way out is actually by recognizing that one was always already beyond minimalism, because the desire for it was an impossible one, for the pure form, and it's worth doing the history to see how that emerges. But equally to recognize the role of the trophy as I'm describing it, and therefore to pose the question of critical architecture without being prescriptive, and that necessitates, and I say this from a theoretical position, a detailed analysis of buildings. To take building after building after building and to begin to discuss in what sense this building seeks to realize the project it has as a building. And then we can begin to differentiate and begin to learn how to analyze, again, from a theoretical position, though respecting the work of the building, for the possibility of the critical. So the way out is to my mind, to utilize the sort of work that Brett is doing, but equally to ask, in my view at least, the sort of questions I'm doing.
Thank you. I think Tony wants to comment.
To address that point, Andrew, that you made, it is absolutely possible to make an architecture which is critical. Now, your use of the word critical would be very different from mine. My active wish is to make an architecture which is, let's say, aware, socially aware, in the realm of ideas, because it's not a moment, I believe, where you can be as instrumental as social activists in the 60s. That's not possible. But it's entirely possible, and I can see it being done, that architecture is aware. You see, this is where I fundamentally do disagree. I don't think it's necessary that the lessons of minimalist art have inevitably to lead to the reduction of architecture to an object of consumption. Quite the reverse. The lessons that I would draw from that work is that an active and socially engaged architecture can exist while at the same time being architecture about architecture and what architecture can bring to the general ideas of a culture. But with the greatest of respect, can I just address the issue of theory? I mean, you touched on the issue of pertinence, and that's a really difficult topic, and I can understand why you felt that architects were beast-like about theory. But I don't think then that's my word, all right? That's my word. But what I'm saying is that there never was a moment, really, in my experience, when architects were more aware of the value of thought coming from other sources than simply building. And it's, of course, absolutely true that reflections on architecture have to be detached from issues of addressing daily questions, but at the same time they do have to operate in that intermediate area, and that has been one of the great difficulties with theory as I've seen it emanating from the school. And not to direct this criticism to you because you've already addressed it, but I have seen what passes as theory emanating from this place, which has a similar characteristic to what you or what's being described as minimalism becoming object and style, and a very transitory type of statement emerging from theoretical organs of this place. And as an architect, that becomes very, very difficult to want to be part of that, while at the same time recognizing that a fruitful discussion between people who reflect on architecture and people who do it is absolutely necessary.
Well, I think we've reached a very good point where I can relinquish my duties as chairman of the discussion round and pass the word back to the chairman.
Well, I would like to really thank everyone once again who's been part of this discussion and part of the exhibition. I think that maybe now, by 7 o'clock, we're now getting to the point where we have also the basis for another kind of conversation that would be hopefully as productive as this has been. I think that for me, going back to what Andrew was saying, especially in the context of the school, it is very important for us to really get to a point where we can raise these issues and to see in what way they might actually affect the work that we do. And it's in that sense that we try to have the exhibition and to try and work with this issue of beyond the minimal, not only as a sort of post-condition, but in a kind of Derridian fashion as something that is also beside it, or somehow has a kind of relational condition to it. And I would not take the kinds of comments that have been made in terms of the theorization of these things at all in a kind of negative fashion, but something that it is part and parcel of this project that we have to deal with. And one of the things that I think is very interesting and important in terms of the work that exists there is that it precisely does deal, if I go back to something that Richard was saying, my sort of German is not good, but I think he was saying it in English when you said that the work that's happening in Graz, I don't think that you said it's just that it's very strong architecture. You said that it's also a very strong object, no? I think there is a slight difference in the sense that the work that is happening in Graz, for example, is very much committed to a certain expression of the dynamism of the architectural object. And it seems that this idea of a certain reduction of some kind of palette, but at the same time bringing the question of material, bringing the question of certain aspects of construction back into the discussion, does precisely allow for a kind of possible projection of our inhabiting, our situating ourselves in relation to this project, which might in itself be quite an interesting thing in terms of why is it that it's allowing that, and what might be the possibilities for its kind of collective engagement. Because one of the things that we haven't had a chance to discuss, and hopefully we will, is this precisely the discussion of these projects in relation to the city, in relation to aspects of urbanism. And partly because of the nature of the projects, we have sort of limited the issue on the focus of the particular project. But I very much hope that we will also get a chance to really deal with it in terms of its engagement with urbanism, which I think would also be an important and interesting discussion. for us. So thank you very, very much, and thank you, Wilfred, for